Droughts, floods, and extreme heat have hit Africa hard over the years. Deadly wildfires have caused destruction in parts of the continent. Forests and vegetation are shrinking at an alarming rate. Wetlands are drying up fast. Agricultural productivity is also falling as the climate change tightens its grip.
Africa, like many regions in the world, is warming faster. To give a number, so the actual rate of warming over the last decade is 0.3, which is higher than what we had before. And to give you another number, so in terms of the rate of warming of Africa, the number is 0.37. And if you remember, 2022 was the fifth warmest year on record, with a rate of warming around 1.50.
1.5 degrees is sort of getting to the level where the consequences become even more catastrophic. If we let the global temperature warms much higher than 1.5 degrees and approaches 2 degrees centigrade higher than it was in the 19th century. And we are approaching that fast because we are not tackling the issue with at the scale and as fast as we are supposed to be.
Experts warn that greenhouse gases from human activities such as burning fossil fuels are contributing significantly to these hazards.
This long-term warming trend, it's driven by continued increases in concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the three main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, they all reached record observed highs.
Africa is responsible for less than 4% of the world's carbon emissions, according to the United Nations. However, it has been by far the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change.
And it's time to break our addiction to fossil fuels and invest in a just and equitable transition. We need to see credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and by 2040 for the rest of the world.
Stop eco! Stop eco!
What do ordinary people make of the climate change conversation and action?
What do we want? Climate justice!
We really feel that fossil fuel companies are the one influencing a lot of decisions during these talks. Africans are not discussing actually the real adaptation and mitigation issues that are actually affecting them.
We want renewable energy now. We want sustainable energy in Africa now. Africa is capable of clean energy and driving sustainable change towards a better future.
When I think about climate change, I think about human rights. You can't talk about climate change without having a human rights lens. I believe the whole climate conversation should be inclusive of intersectionality, feminist organizing. Having in mind the majority of farmers in Africa are women, are the ones who produce food for us to eat.
In 2022, more than 110 million people in Africa were directly affected by climate-related hazards. Countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia in the Horn of Africa faced their worst drought in 40 years. The drought displaced more than 500,000 people in Ethiopia and nearly 1.2 million in Somalia. There were about 5,000 fatalities, of which 48% were associated with drought and 43% with flooding, according to the Emergency Event Database.
By last year, the Horn of Africa was really embroiled in a very, very severe drought, which where the rainfalls have failed for 4 consecutive seasons, and that has led to severe failure of farming in the region, with hunger, starvation, death of livestock. Another one is flooding. There have been devastating floods in West Africa, say in Nigeria. Again, last year they had the worst flooding for decades. And that led to the death, displacement, loss of lives and property.
One of the worst floods in decades in Africa occurred in the Libyan city of Derna recently following a massive storm. Thousands of people died. So far, 2023 is said to be the second hottest year on record in the world, marginally behind 2016.
There are several reports showing that things are getting worse because we are not tackling the problem at its roots, and we are not tackling it with the adequate tools that we have and at the scale that we need to tackle it more. In some places, you are getting the second hottest year ever on record, but in other places, you are getting the hottest.
Many African countries are now shifting towards clean energy with low carbon technologies and tax systems, including resilient infrastructure. Morocco, for instance, has built the world's largest concentrated solar facility, Noor, to help achieve the country's goal of 52% renewable energy mix by 2030. The advanced 6,000-acre solar complex serves as a clean energy source for over 1 million Moroccans. And in June 2019, South Africa introduced a Carbon Tax Act, which places specific levies on greenhouse gases from fuel combustion and industrial processes and emissions. The tax system is expected to reduce the country's emissions by more than 30% relative to the baseline by 2035. Nigeria, which struggles with electricity access for a majority of its population, has also set a renewable energy target of 30% by 2030. The first Africa Climate Summit was held from September 4th to September 6th, 2023 in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. African leaders believe the continent can supply the rest of the world with clean energy if the continent's potentials are fully harnessed.
For a very long time, we have looked at this as a problem. It is time we flipped and looked at it from the other side. There are opportunities, immense opportunities as well.
Besides highlighting the continent's unparalleled potentials, such as in solar energy and biofuels, the summit also looked at devastating effects of climate change on Africa and its people. At the end of the summit, African leaders urged world's major economies who pollute the environment the most to fulfill their financial pledges to tackle the climate crisis. The Africa Climate Summit was held less than 3 months before the UN's annual climate conference, COP28, where world leaders are due to once again gather to discuss the worsening climate crisis. Analysts say what is more crucial is stronger and quicker action.
I think the important thing is to speed up the processes. Based on the 7 years experience in Africa, the intention is there. The goodwill is there, but it takes time to convert it to action. I think what we need to see is a speedy action where the decision maker, the stakeholder, take the right decision quickly.
United Nations Environment Programme estimates that the cost of adapting to climate change across Africa could reach $50 billion a year by 2050 if the global temperature increase is kept within 2 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Campaigners say the world is in a race against time to save the planet for a better future.